Well, good morning. This is the first of Newt's news. Newton Gatoff is talking to the Max, to Gary Max.
And, I feel like they ought to be screaming.
You should be screaming, but and this is a session two sort of media junkies, I guess.
Yes.
Jewish media junkies talking about, well, what's news in Jewish Melbourne and the world. So this is the first in a series of little chats.
Yeah, well, it'd be a big chat if it's according.
It should be a big chat.
Huge chat. And a Jewish junkie is exactly how I describe myself.
No, Jewish news junkie.
I know, but I'm just into anything that's Jewish at the moment. I feel like I've only just discovered that opportunity that we all have to jump into Jewish stuff. But the news is particularly interesting to me.
What's particularly interesting at the moment?
Well, at the moment, as I was coming in, it's kind of Jewish. The so-called Russian airline disaster, which we all thought was a mistake, but in fact it is looking more and more like a nightmare revisited, where bombs are placed on airlines. Looks like there was a bit of a warning, which none of us knew about, when a British airliner landed in August, just having missed its own missile.
Really?
Yeah.
When was that? I didn't hear that.
Well, I've only just caught it myself. This is the thing with news junkies.
I know. It happens so fast.
It happens very fast, and then you're never quite sure what to believe or who to believe. But it is a fact that a missile was fired across the bows of an airliner landing in Cairo, a Thompson airliner, I believe it was, from the UK, and basically no one told anyone except clearly the pilot mentioned it to his boss, but it probably seemed to be a good thing for.
How did that not become news?
I know, it's extraordinary.
How long ago was that?
August, apparently.
August.
Yeah, so it's fairly recent, and I can only imagine the reason that the Russians don't want us to jump into worry mode, and the fact that the rest of the world doesn't want. It's just because it doesn't suit people necessarily to give.
But this is clearly the Russian airliner is now clearly going to ramp up Russia's involvement with whatever the war against ISIS,
whatever it is
going to be.
Yeah, and we're not quite sure if this is the war, the digital war, the digital discussion, or if it's all happening out on the streets. And I think it's a bit of both. So what we do on a weekly basis, you and I and the rest of the Jewish world, is we talk and we listen, and we often repeat what we see. But sometimes we don't get to see everything.
No, we don't.
So I guess it's important that the conversation happens both on the screens and on the airwaves and in social media as much as it does in a coffee shop and around the dinner table, because we need to make our own minds up about what sort of a war this is going to be. And I don't think we should immediately roll up our sleeves. Thank you very much. Roll up our sleeves and just get stuck into the hard fighting. I think there's a lot more fighting to do, literally around a table.
But ISIS seem quite implacable, don't they? They really don't care who they target, so long as they cause great terror. That's what they're trying to do globally, and they really don't care who they target.
No, we're all actually, and it's not just a Jewish thing by any stretch of the imagination.
Absolutely not.
I can see targets. We're all infidels unless we believe, unless we're prepared to sign up to their charter of Islam. We're all targets,
including Muslims.
Indeed.
But let's take it a little bit closer to home. Let's take it to what's happening very close by in Israel at the moment.
Indeed.
Because this will definitely have future implications for Israel, but at the moment, of course, we've got our own problems going on there. It doesn't seem as though there is any cessation in the what you'd call civil terror attacks.
I believe that's just something we're all going to be living with for a great length of time to come. I think Israel, probably more than any other country, is prepared better for this type of attack on airlines, because we have certainly the best security in the world. If you're ever jumping on a plane flying to Israel,
Yes.
you can be fairly sure that it's been very, very carefully checked over by Israeli security staff. So I think, although we are experiencing the worst of it on the streets, the civilian war, if you like, on that ISIS have taken to, the civilian terror, I don't believe that Israel's going to be unique in that. I think it's going to visit every city.
It's going to happen everywhere.
Indeed. I'm suggesting that Israel will be one of the safest places to be in 10 years' time, because we will have this security thing down on pat.
That would be nice to hope for, but I can't see it happening. I think what most of the broader Western world doesn't understand is just how porous the borders are between the so-called across the Green Line, the so-called Green Line, and there really is a lot of daily interchange, and I think that's the sort of soft underbelly, and that's not talking about Israeli Arabs as well, who live amongst Israeli Jews and are also causing a lot of these issues. It's the local homegrown attacks, which reminds me, by the way, Vic Alhadeff wrote a very interesting piece in the Australian yesterday, in the Weekend Australian, where he said there was unanimous sympathy for the policeman in Sydney who had shot the 15-year-old boy who had attacked and killed the police worker. But when Israelis defend themselves against attacks in Israel, that's called disproportionate force.
Yeah, and it's easy to call it.
It's a good counterpoint.
It is a very good counterpoint. Do you know what? I'm embarrassed to admit I hadn't even made that connection.
No.
But taking out a terrorist is obviously going to be questionable if it's a 14-year-old boy with a small penknife in his hand. Is that a terrorist? And obviously, in the eyes of somebody who's been stabbed in the back, and
exactly.
I think we all saw a picture on Facebook this week of an elderly, an 80-year-old lady who was just walking along and suddenly found herself with a knife in her chest.
Yes.
I mean, the truth is that the argument about what is and what does and what doesn't allow someone to take out an individual on the street can be had for many, many, many months. I mean, the reality is we're civilians. Does that give us any lesser right to fire a gun in the face of what we believe is a terrorist than if it was an armed police officer?
Yeah.
Because if in Australia it was, if I'm not mistaken,
it was a police officer.
It was a police officer that actually shot, and if that had been a private individual who'd somehow been carrying a weapon,
that would be treated differently. Because in Australia, and I don't know what the law is in Israel about carrying weapons, but in Australia, it's definitely not something every citizen is allowed to do.
True.
To carry a firearm.
I think Netanyahu put out somebody put out a statement recently saying that it is for every Israeli to arm himself if they
feel the need to.
If it's appropriate. No.
I want to finish on one other thing, though. I think we should talk about it, because by the time this is broadcast, actually, this will have happened. But on Monday, Netanyahu is going to meet with Obama in Washington, and given the state of their relationship over the last year, which is everything that we know has declined, I see it now, of course, and Netanyahu's already flagged this, that they're going to move on. They're going to talk about actually the other side of the agreement with Iran, and that is arming Israel to make sure that they can defend themselves, which is an interesting aspect to a nuclear agreement with Iran. But never mind that. I think it's really important. We have Obama there. He's still going to be president for over another more than 12 months. So we still have to live with this guy, and we still have to try and do something. I'm not sure whether he now wants to leave a legacy.
No, I think it's a little bit late.
It's a bit late.
A bit late to actually
But he does want to set the stage for his successor.
Yeah, indeed. And I think Netanyahu's in exactly the same boat. He doesn't want to be seen as somebody who turned his back on the president, despite the relationship being as frosty as it has been. Look, I think if it's about arming each other, supporting Israel, we'll arm the Americans with the kudos that they deserve,
Yes.
And they'll arm us with real hardcore missile. I think that's just protocol. I think that's politics per se. I think what the media will read into it and how it is broadcast to the world is probably more important.
Yes.
Because if there is not a warming of that relationship physically, which is not just about a simple handshake and a wave, it's got to be something which is viable.
That's right.
Obama can speak to the current issues that we have, which is obviously about security in the cities of Israel. And that we can talk about Iran in terms of, look, we met with Putin. I say we. Netanyahu met with Putin.
Correct.
Agreed where the boundaries were and where the flies
between Syria and Israel. Yes, indeed.
Between Syria and
Israel,
to ensure we don't have any mishaps.
and this is part of Russia's ascendancy in this whole Middle East zone of conflict.
Well, to bring us back to where we started,
That's
and
right.
I think actually that is what they will be discussing, is how America's relationship with Russia should go forward from here, because there has to be a sense of alliance between the two powers.
Yes.
If we're to achieve what we all want to achieve, which is the end of Daesh, ISIS, whatever
we want to call it. Yes. Okay. Well, Newt's News. Thank you for talking to the Max today. And it's been a great introduction for what we're going to do on a regular basis. You wanted to say something?
I just wanted to say that I'm happy to be seeing Newt's News on the shtick every Sunday on TV, whilst Channel 31 still exists.
Yes,
so,
for another year.
For another year. So you can always tune in on a weekly basis. And hopefully we can have a little bit of radio and a little bit of TV to talk more to the max, which is great.
Absolutely. And I really want to encourage people to listen to Jewish topics and Jewish discussions, because it's so important to our lives here in Melbourne.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you, Newton.
Thanks, Gary.